So first time for everything. This is my first time ever trying to speak with reader glasses I bought at CVS. So we'll see how that goes. So thank you for taking the time to join us today. It's wonderful to be back in person. It's wonderful to see all of you and to be able to enjoy this beautiful spring day together. And we'll thank the folks that helped create COVID vaccines that make it more possible for us to start to spend more time together in person as we've so long wanted to do. So just a few short words about Mayor Wu, and then you'll be able to hear from the mayor herself. Mayor Wu is the daughter of immigrants. She's Boston Public Schools' mom to 2 boys, MBA commuter, and fierce believer that we can solve our deepest challenges through building community. First elected to the Boston City Council in November 2013 at the age of 28. Wu was the first Asian American woman to serve in the council. In January 2016, she was elected president of the City Council. As a councilor, Mayor Wu is the lead on a number of important key initiatives that have come to stay with the city. And that includes, among other things, paid parental leave ordinance and healthcare equity ordinance. She also offered Boston's communications for access to city services regardless of English language proficiency or communications disability. So it's all about openness and engagement, as our governments should be. Mayor Wu got her start at City Hall working for Mayor Thomas Menino as a Rappaport Fellow, where at that time she created the city's first guide to the restaurant permitting process from start to finish, and was also a driving force to launch Boston's food truck program. So any challenges around restaurant permitting processes and such, she's been there before and she'll take care of it again. As a former restaurant owner, legal services attorney, and legal guardian of her younger sister, our mayor understands firsthand the barriers that families and communities face. She's worked in a number of entities around community advocacy, including the Wilmer Hare Legal Services Center in Jamaica Plain, providing legal advice to low-income small business owners, as well as the Medical Legal Aid Partnership at Boston Medical Center. And in 2016, then Councilor Wu was honored as one of 10 outstanding young leaders by the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, and as part of Marie Claire magazine's New Guard, the 50 most influential women in America. Mayor Wu graduated from Harvard College and Harvard Law School. She's fluent in Mandarin and Spanish, which we have seen her use at some press conferences to our delight. And she lives in Roslindale with her husband and her children. And we appreciate them sharing her with us and with the city as our mayor. Thank you, Mayor. Please join us.
Good morning, everyone. Or good afternoon at this point. Thank you so much, Pam. Thank you to you and your team for ensuring that our city continues to have incredibly meaningful and important conversations. Very proud to see you in this leadership role. So round of applause for Pam and the Research Bureau. Please join me also in giving a thank you. I know I'm told I'm between you all and lunch, so I apologize, but thank you in advance to our incredible wait staff and the team who are taking care of us here. And among so many distinguished leaders from all across our city and our communities in the room, there are way too many to go around table by table. And thank you for all the many hats that you wear and contributions to our city in your professional, your personal, your civic capacities. I'm incredibly grateful for all that you do for Boston. I do want to recognize our cabinet members who are here and some fellow elected officials as well. So I'll just run down the list that was provided, and then I'll see who I missed. I'm told that our Chief of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion, Shagun Idowu, is here. Our Chief of Housing, Sheila Dillon. Chief of Policy, Mike Firestone. Chief of Energy, Environment, and Open Space, Mariama White-Hammond. Our Corporation Counsel, Adam Cederbaum. Chief of Communications, Jessica Pierre. Director of the Office of Police Accountability and Transparency, Stephanie Everett. Senior Advisor on Labor, Lou Mandarini. Our Director of Intergovernmental Relations, Claire Kelly. Chief of Community Engagement, Brianna Malore, and our Chief Administrative Officer, Alex Lawrence. Please give a round of applause to our incredibly dedicated team. And I know because I rode over with him from our last event, but somehow he's not on this list and he's referenced later, our very new, as in 2 weeks into his new job, Chief of Planning Arthur Jemison is here as well. Who did I miss from our city cabinet side? Okay, I think they're just not raising their hands. I see some, Mike Christopher's here, other folks are here on our team as well. Thank you. And I want to recognize the elected officials who I get to serve with every day. Incredibly honored to be working alongside them for this moment in our city. City Council President Ed Flynn is here. He's at the same table as City Councilor Michael Flaherty. And City Councilor Erin Murphy. I have City Councilor Rutsui Luijen on my list. I think she's RSVP'd somewhere in the room. And I know I saw a couple former city councilors as well. I saw John Tobin here, but I do want to recognize a few immediately previous city council presidents. Matt O'Malley is here. Thank you, Matt. And former City Council President Andrea Campbell is here. I see Suffolk County Sheriff Steve Tompkins here. Did I miss any elected officials? Okay, I'm told this was not my job. I really wanted to do it, so I'm sure you're going to hear that all over again later. They deserve the double recognition. So for my remarks today, to talk about where we're headed in the future, I wanted to start 125 years ago in the past. 125 years ago, the Boston Globe ran a headline that read, "Novelty Over." The article described how the recently constructed underground train car between Park Street and Boylston Street stations was already starting to see fewer riders boarding it just to ride for fun. Just 2 days after the nation's first ever subway line opened, apparently the novelty had already worn off. And in its place was everyday efficiency, convenience. Today we take great pride in the fact that we were the first city in the country to make this groundbreaking investment in public transit, innovating with the very first subway tunnel in the nation. But Boston didn't always feel that way. In fact, when it was first introduced, the idea to build an underground subway system was labeled dangerous and radical. Business owners on Tremont Street organized the Anti-Subway League, holding meetings, distributing flyers, lobbying local leaders to vote against this line's creation. They raised aesthetic concerns about digging up the historic Boston Common. They warned that construction would disturb snakes and rats living underground, forcing them up to the surface and into the streets, spreading fear and disease throughout the city. Some pointed out that building the tunnel would require disturbing buried remains, which could bring bad luck and a jinx upon all of Boston forever. And of course, there were concerns about how this might impact our economy. The League's president, W.G. Harris, spoke of the, quote, "great disadvantage and damage to business, which will necessarily follow so extensive a tearing up of the street." Many others echoed this, worrying that their businesses would sustain serious losses during a period of heavy construction for something never seen before and never recover after that. Others spoke of the threat to health and property posed by construction that might disrupt sewers, water pipes, and electric wiring. The League eventually collected thousands of signatures from residents and business owners opposing the creation of, quote, any subway in any portion of the city of Boston. Now, as someone who rides the T to work on a regular basis, I won't tell you that it's perfect, but I think we can all agree that a Boston without any T in any portion of the city would not be a better Boston. That's true today, and it became apparent almost immediately after that first line was up and running. Within just 3 years of its construction, Park Street was the 4th most highly used subway station in the world. And in the first 10 years after the T was introduced, Boston's public transit ridership numbers increased by nearly 60%. And in the decades that followed, public transit became the most popular way for residents and visitors alike to access downtown, with the T bringing in roughly half of all downtown foot traffic. The Common was restored, snakes didn't overtake the city, and the business owners on Tremont Street couldn't have been happier. Even more importantly, residents across Boston were connected to jobs, healthcare, education, and housing. Neighborhoods and businesses, parks and libraries, museums, colleges, all suddenly became accessible in ways they hadn't before. Public transit proved to be a public good in the truest sense of the term. It connects us to this day to the places and resources we need to thrive in our communities. It connects us to each other. Today, we have a similar opportunity to connect and transform our city in a moment of urgency and possibility. The urgency is clear. Cities across the country are struggling to fully emerge from the pandemic. Remote and hybrid work have forever changed our economy and the relationship between where we live and what we do. Boston lost roughly 37,000 residents between 2020 and 2021, a little less than 1% of our total population. But working in person at our downtown commercial buildings remains down by nearly a third of pre-pandemic foot traffic. As global competition for talent and capital sharpens in this changed environment of flexibility and remote work, Boston must become a place where people can thrive, where innovators and entrepreneurs from all communities, all walks of life want to be and can afford to stay. At the same time, the pandemic deepened existing inequities across society, from higher mortality rates within Black communities to the virus's disproportionate impact on women in the workforce and the urgency of climate action. We are at a crossroads, and the perception that inaction is somehow safer, that the status quo comes at no cost, simply isn't true. Our challenges, long predating the pandemic, have been made more complicated, grown more entrenched by our own unwillingness to, as the Anti-Subway League president said, so extensively tear up the street. From deferred maintenance on the T or in our school buildings, skyrocketing housing costs, the deepening racial wealth gap pushing families out of our city, to pollution from increasingly congested roads impacting our long-term health, and the mental health epidemic rooted in trauma and isolation. Addressing our long-standing challenges will require all of us. We'll need to embrace the disruption that can accompany the kind of transformative changes we need right now. We must move away from putting Band-Aids on the symptoms of our problems and invest instead in tackling root causes. Here is where our greatest opportunities lie. In fact, that local government stands the best chance to rebuild our economy, democracy, and communities in this moment. Because as intertwined as our challenges are, so are our solutions. And we are already working hard every day to shift what's possible through setting a foundation for the future, connecting our communities, and delivering on the details of city government. Boston may be known for our history and longevity, but our true legacy is that we have pushed this country to reimagine a foundation for the future time and again, from the birth of our democracy and public education to life-saving technologies, vaccines, innovations. And in 2022, being the leading city for the future means taking action to become the greenest city in America, a city for everyone, where families can thrive. We've built on the foundation grown over centuries of collaboration and ecosystem building through our anchor institutions in healthcare, higher education, to emerge right now in this moment as a national pace setter, a hub for life sciences, clean energy, and mission-driven tech. Now, let us build the workforce of the future to nurture and grow these industries, reflecting the full diversity of our communities here in the birthplace of public education. As early as 1888, kindergartens in Boston were admitting children as young as 3.5 years old. But ironically today, with more definitive science on the significant benefits of early education, we have even more work to do. Between 2017 and 2020, the number of early education centers serving children under the age of 5 in Boston dropped by 24%. We know how crucial these first few years of development are and how powerful it can be to get them right for our littlest leaders, for our families, for our economy. So that's why earlier this year we established the city's first ever Office of Early Childhood, committed to creating universal, affordable, high-quality early education and care for all infants, toddlers, and children under the age of 5. Over the next year, this office will focus on expanding our options for early ed and care and accelerating the creation of a universal pre-K system. This upcoming school year, 1,000 more 4-year-olds and hundreds more 3-year-olds will be enrolled in a quality pre-kindergarten program than when the initiative first began. And we're working to clarify existing citing and funding requirements in the zoning code to embed the centrality of early education and care in Boston's growth. This office will also be leading the way in investing in our workforce by building sustainable career paths for early educators and making life easier for our families by creating a multilingual, one-stop shop for program enrollment. In partnership with the Boston Public Schools, we'll integrate family child care programs with our Universal Pre-K initiative because these community-based programs often offer additional benefits like native language instruction, mixed-age learning environments, and more flexible schedules for working families. More than 1 in 5 family households in Boston have kids under the age of 5. When we invest in meeting the needs of our children, we're investing in Boston's families, in Boston's immigrants, in our entrepreneurs, our essential workers and parents and communities of color, and of course, in our youngest residents, which yields the greatest return on investment of all. We don't just attract the best and brightest minds here in Boston, we grow and raise them. And we're going to do all that we can. Which brings me to my next point, our most important and immediate pipeline for talent and innovation in our city, our schools. As a mom with 2 boys in BPS, I am deeply aware of the potential our education system has to broaden horizons and widen the paths our young people tread. And I'm also aware of the ways in which our current system falls short of that goal. BPS today faces enormous disparities deepened by the pandemic, which need to be addressed with urgency. Over the course of a mayoral term, a child who is just starting kindergarten will be almost finished with elementary school. A student entering high school will be preparing to graduate and leave our Boston Public Schools. There is no time to waste. Earlier this month, we announced a major expansion of Boston's early college and innovation pathways, connecting Boston Public Schools with higher education and private sector partners, including many in this room, to get a head start on training our workforce for the future. We launched our Green New Deal for BPS because healthy, inspiring facilities are critical for rigorous and nurturing learning. And as we near the end of our search for our next school superintendent, we're also changing the structures throughout all of city government to support our school department. City Hall's operations cabinet is growing significantly to share in the community process, design and engineering and construction that will dramatically overhaul our school facilities so the Boston Public Schools have more bandwidth organizationally to focus on teaching and learning. Other city departments are connecting our young people and their families with resources to close the digital divide, address food insecurity, housing instability, and offer more youth jobs than ever before. Because preparing our future leaders to reach their fullest potential means taking a holistic approach to supporting them and the communities that raise them. With this group and so many others across the city, we've discussed the barriers and complexities of how Boston's development and success hasn't been shared equitably across our communities. So we've talked about setting a foundation for the future, now connecting our communities. We all know, we've heard across every single one of our neighborhoods, growing housing costs, made worse by a lack of reliable transportation options, fuels displacement for families across our neighborhoods. It hamstrings companies and organizations looking to recruit and retain talent, especially in this new economic situation. Our charge in this moment is to ensure that Boston's growth connects our communities with thoughtful, comprehensive planning and the infrastructure for mobility and accessibility. Last week, we welcomed our new Chief of Planning to City Hall. Chief Arthur Jemison brings a wealth of expertise, wisdom, and vision to embark on the journey of reorienting our processes and structures towards predictability, resiliency, and affordability in Boston. Together with our Chief, our new Director of Operations and Organizational Transformation, Devin Quirk, and a soon-to-be hired Director of Urban Design, we will connect our communities with that foundation for the future, our shared growth. That organizational capacity is backed up by resources for our recovery from the pandemic. We are directing and have before the City Council the bulk of our federal recovery dollars to housing affordability, from preserving existing affordable units to helping finance new, badly needed affordable housing, which will be energy efficient and green, and also boost home ownership. Connecting our communities also means doing more to celebrate and uplift the heart and soul of our city, the arts and culture that bring Boston to life, infuse our neighborhoods with energy and inspiration, and make our city a place that people want to live, work, and play in. The strength and vibrancy of our arts scene underpins our community and our economy. Not only are the arts essential for our mental and emotional well-being, they're central to our economic recovery. And yet Boston consistently lags behind our peer cities when it comes to public investments in this critical and joyous engine for future growth. That's why the budget we proposed, and again, going through our process with the City Council, makes a powerful investment in our arts and culture sector through the capital budget, in addition to an unprecedented proposed investment of federal recovery funds as infrastructure for placemaking and integrating arts and culture into every aspect of civic life. The challenges before us aren't new. They're long-standing, complex, and daunting even. But I want to talk to you about what's special about city government, delivering on the details. City government, especially now, is about that fact that there's always room for action at the local level when we're closest to the people. Even in our first 6 months, we've already begun breaking down the details of how municipal government can act with impact. We're putting our money where our mouth is to close the racial wealth gap with a focus on equity in city contracting. Earlier this month, we announced that starting July 1st, City Fresh Foods will, true to their name, provide fresh, nutritious, culturally relevant, and appropriate food for nearly 50,000 Boston Public School students. This vended meals contract is valued at over $17 million. It's the largest non-construction contract the city has ever awarded to a certified Black-owned business, and one based right here in our city and right in Roxbury. As the opioid crisis sweeps through communities across the country, we're looking at the details of how we innovate and measure the impacts of a low-threshold supportive housing approach in partnership with the state and the region to prevent the dangers of encampments in our city and connect residents to the services they need. In the face of accelerating climate change, we're looking at the details of how to transition diesel-polluting school buses to electric, serviced by Madison Park students who will have the training to step into opportunities in the green economy. And with the pandemic deepening a mental health epidemic in our schools, our homes, our communities, at the city level, we're looking at the details and proposing a new behavioral health center to recruit, train, and place clinicians of color and multilingual providers in much-needed roles to meet our communities where they are. We're making plans for water and sewer infrastructure, waste management, curbside composting, and street design that adds up to a healthy resilience for all of us. Our job is to build the trust needed to do big things together by getting the little things right, reimagining what's possible, detail by detail, block by block, week by week. I recently had the honor of writing a letter to be included in the time capsule buried in the center of the new City Hall Plaza that's currently under construction. It's in there alongside Michael Flaherty's business cards and Aaron Murphy's documents and Ed Flynn's papers. And for my part, in the hopes of writing something worthy of the future to be opened 100 years by a future mayor, I looked to the past. I read through time capsule letters from previous mayors throughout our city's history. We found ones from 1830, from 1930, and from 1981. In so many ways, it's very surreal to read the words of predecessors reaching forward through the centuries to talk about their hopes and dreams and fears for our city. There are many differences in those letters in voice and style and in tone, but they all shared two things. First, they all made some attempt at imagining our city's future, even while acknowledging the challenge of trying to picture a world changed by hundreds of years of progress and technological advancement, medical innovation, cultural progress. They tried. There were guesses about cloning, about alternative energy sources, and even how many of the surrounding cities and towns Boston would start to absorb. We didn't quite get there. I think Brookline stopped us. That's okay. And yet, despite all their imagining, the second thing that every single letter shared was the very beginning, the opening salutation. They each began with some version of "Sir" or "Dear Mr. Mayor." For all their determination to dream big and boldly about our future, not a single mayor imagined that someday someone like me or Kim Janey before me would be mayor. And almost certainly, they couldn't have imagined the resources and momentum available to us at this moment to implement lasting changes and build a foundation for a brighter future. So if you take just one thing away from today, let it be this. This moment is proof that we are capable of so much more than we can imagine. We can make transit accessible and housing and high-quality childcare affordable. We can close the gaps in our school system and become the greenest city in America. We can make the arts sustainable and pervasive and build a city that's more connected, equitable, healthy, and joyful. But to do so, we can't be afraid to tear up the street, to act with urgency and put everything back together in a form that is different and bolder than before, to dream more than we have before, and take action together on the details that move us closer, step by step, to the future we deserve. I want to thank you all again for giving me the opportunity to share this vision with you and for convening this conversation. We'll need your partnership in joining us to embrace the possibility that tomorrow holds as well. Thank you so much.
Hi, can we have a mic to the front of the room, please? Handheld mic to the front of the room.
I missed maybe the most important former city council president who reminds me that he was the youngest city council president in history by a year before me. Larry DeCara is here as well.
Okay, so I'm going to step off.
Okay.
And I'm going to let you answer.
Q&A.
Because you are the mayor, and I'm going to sort of do something over from the side here. So that was wonderful. It is really exciting that in a moment when there's so much challenge related to the pandemic, that the federal government has brought us quite a few resources, over $400 million for the city hall side of our city government.
All the moms in the room were like, no.
Wouldn't be the first time. So over $400 million for a lot of opportunities, a lot of investment, and quite a bit more money for our Boston Public Schools directly through the ESSER funding. So one of the things that's been on my mind, and now I get to be the city's watchdog, is how are you starting to prepare now for when that federal money goes away? And there's programs and initiatives that we want to sustain. And there's maybe new school buildings that we want to make sure stay in great condition so we don't have to create new buildings yet again. So can you speak a little bit to that challenge that comes with the opportunity of a substantial amount of, it's like Christmas Eve, you got tons and tons of resources, it's all showing up. How do we plan to take care of what we create for the long term?
Absolutely. So a couple points on this. One is that I am incredibly grateful that the City Council had the foresight to go ahead and establish the ARPA, American Rescue Plan Committee, to have dedicated conversations and direct hearings and process on that. That was led initially by City Councilor Michael Flaherty. Now Kenzie Bach is chair of that committee. And what we have discussed in those settings, building off of, in fact, a portion of those funds already used in the last administration to facilitate community process citywide about what people wanted to see. What has come back over and over again is that, one, we need these funds to create lasting impact. We cannot fritter away or put Band-Aids on situations that will leave us in the same place, but just 1 year down the road after these funds have been spent. And so that's been really important to either think about infrastructure that will be lasting, physical infrastructure like school buildings or other investments in our communities that we've needed. Think about social infrastructure like childcare and getting the programs in place that will draw people back in person to be in our city and to be able to thrive here. Or to think about testing out infrastructure that then we have a case for down the road. Again, I will reinforce that often it feels like our biggest barrier in Boston is actually not about resources or expertise or helping hands in the community. It is about a belief that this is all we have to settle for, whether it's the opportunities for our kids in our schools or the functionality of our public transit system or the affordability, or lack thereof, in our housing market. We have to be imaginative in this moment and make some big bets on Boston, and that was the goal of the funds. The second thing to note is that there's a deadline and a time frame. These funds must be used in the next couple of years. And so in some ways, that's helpful from the federal government saying, do not squirrel this away. We need to see the impact immediately, and it has to be tied. There are parameters around various sources tied to the harm and the stress and impact from the pandemic directly. So whether that's in geographic location or the type of uses, there's very specific parameters here. And then I think two more points I want to make. One is we wanted these funds to showcase also how all of Boston's resources should be working in concert and in sync, rather than different departments siloed working on different items. Really, each of these initiatives that are proposed cut across everything related to climate, health, jobs, and our general economic recovery as well, every single one of the proposed investments. And that's why we put forward a picture of how all of the funds would be used, as opposed to a portion at a time, separate from the budget process and this and that. It's all in concert with how our operations budget is funded, amplified by the capital budget, and now with this one-time investment really supercharging and accelerating the impact. For example, with our new Office of Early Childhood, the recurring operational costs live in the operations budget. And so there's no fiscal cliff when it comes to how we will fund staff or things that we know year to year will still be there. But what we're looking to do is tie together investments on the capital side with facilities and school buildings that can house some of this activity. And then on the federal side, ensure that we can really create the widest platform to help address inequities that exist and set a foundation for what's going to come in the future. In some ways, the most important point I want to make about the federal funds is that there will be more coming. And I know when we open the news about the federal government, it doesn't feel like that every day. But we are at such a dire point when it comes to our climate crisis, when it comes to housing and mental health. There will be, whether soon or a little bit further in the future, a recognition at the federal level that we need that kind of help. But when we look at the lessons of the past, when we look at how the New Deal funding was allocated decades ago, it didn't go equally and equitably to every state. It wasn't as if every city got some equal amount of that federal funding. Those who were first in line, because they had shovel-ready projects, benefited first and most. And so in some ways, we need to use this opportunity of having a once-in-a-generation infusion to prepare us to get the equivalent of shovel-ready on our social infrastructure, on our climate resiliency plans, on everything else. If we can demonstrate and measure the impact of 3 free bus lines in the city of Boston, of a new approach to early education, of a low threshold supportive housing approach at Mass and Cass, then when we can identify, it makes a case for more resources, and when they're available, we can put them to the most effective and efficient use.
Terrific, thank you. You've spent some time on early education, childcare, very important. I'd also like to, I think this group would like to hear a little bit more from you as well about the other end of the education process. So I had the opportunity to be at that event hosted by State Street, where you and some of our education experts and school committee leaders spoke about some programs focused on early college. And can you talk a little bit about that? You know, we've got many employers in this room who are excited to see Boston students, Boston residents, become engaged in some of the business opportunities in the city and the work opportunities and growing through those experiences.
There are many folks in this room who could give the dissertation and seminar on this in much greater detail. So I will give the high level, but if you want to know about how this works and how long it took and all the effort to get here, talk to Aisha Francis, talk to others in the room who have been part of building this long before I was in this post. And so I'm incredibly grateful for all the work that I get to now receive the baton on and push to amplify and accelerate. We did have a great announcement event at State Street that came after a long time of preparation in the community and in partnership with the city, focused on early college and innovation pathways that really seeks to make the most of our high school students' time at BPS. Sometimes people across the country are shocked, or even around the city are shocked when I tell them that how many students per grade there are in the Boston Public Schools. In a city with our resources, with our incredible institutions and jobs and growth, wrapping our arms around just 4,000 students per class is not a heavy lift for Boston. We need to be better about coordinating, having a vision for where we're taking this, and then following through on the partnerships. And so we're really looking at this Early College and Innovation Pathways program as one example to build that connective tissue and muscle with all of our partners in various sectors of the city to expand to other forms as well. But the 30-second version of this is that we know there are jobs in Boston that are growing and that these are the jobs of the future. We're #1 in life sciences across the country. We're going to hold on to that spot. We know that many of your institutions and organizations are looking for talent and that we have it right here. We just need to make those connections. So we're working with companies to work with higher ed institutions to design the curriculum and the training that we can then start to house right in our Boston Public Schools. So students from an earlier age, say sophomore year, can begin to have courses taught in their Boston Public Schools by professors from Ben Franklin Cummings Institute or Wentworth or other universities, Bunker Hill Community College, Roxbury Community College. Then by their junior and senior year, they know how the PACE works, they know how they have some relationships, they go on campus while they're still enrolled in the Boston Public Schools and begin to earn credits on campus. Again, still wrapped around in the supports from their guidance counselors, the adults, and the whole ecosystem that we have of supportive adults based in the Boston Public Schools in partnership with our higher ed institutions. Then by the time they graduate and move on to these institutions, they have a ready home that they're already familiar with. It was incredible to watch the look on those high school seniors' faces when Dr. Francis announced that each and every one of them at the Dearborn were admitted automatically already to Ben Franklin, and that they had one thing already set. Many of them already knew the institution because they've already been taking classes. So it saves them money down the line because they can now graduate early potentially from those universities. They're familiar, they feel comfortable, and they have those support mechanisms. And then they can be connected to these industries and these jobs even more quickly to help fill the roles that you all are looking to fill.
That sounds fantastic. We do have a generous offer from Mayor Wu on the table to take questions from the audience. And I know there are some people out there with curious minds, and anybody brave enough is welcome to stand up at this time.
And in the meantime, I see someone I didn't recognize earlier as well. Jim Williamson, who's our budget director, is here. He's in charge of everything I just talked about. Thank you, Jim, for your leadership.
Any questions? Thank you, Stephanie. Stephanie is the vice chair of the Research Bureau.
I also work for Verizon, and we have the new.
Can everyone hear Stephanie? Okay, can we pass the mic? Okay.
Hi, thanks for joining us, Mayor Wu. So I work for Verizon, and we just built a beautiful new building in downtown attached to the TD Garden. And one of the things we're working on is getting our employees back to work. And you just talked about how activity in the downtown area is not what it was pre-pandemic. And just kind of curious, I know you've been focusing on this, what your administration is doing and what businesses can do to attract people back downtown so we can have the vibrancy that we had pre-pandemic and continue to grow as a community.
Thank you, and thank you for investing right in our city. It's been a little good luck there at the Garden, so we're keeping fingers crossed too. We're doing everything we can to help attract and show off what people are missing out on when they're not coming in person, right? The Boston Blooms Block Party and Downtown Initiative to create that buzz around music and our small businesses and all that you can see when you just are bumping into someone who you didn't expect to because everybody's here. And that is really the beauty and the secret ingredient of cities, is that we create the density and the creativity that comes from just running into the unexpected and having everyone build up that connective tissue. And so where remote work is increased and helped with accessibility in a lot of ways, I don't know if everyone else's schedule also has doubled, because now when you're commuting somewhere, you can still be on a Zoom meeting in between. So in some ways, there's great benefit, but we also want to make sure that we're capturing why people want to come downtown and be in person, all there is to enjoy about the city. In that area, I don't know if I can announce this exactly yet, but we are working on some things related to the playoff series and what might, again, create some more buzz and activity. But the reality is that no amount of forcing employees to come back downtown or showing that there's fun things to do will get us past the hump until the supports are there to make it possible for employees to manage work-life balance. Childcare is absolutely essential to that. And we recognize that models of work and commute aren't like what they were before. And I've been in, my kids are 4 and 7 now. We've been through the call every number you can find and see what slots they have open, and then being told, even if you only need 4 days a week or 3 days a week, you have to pay for all of it because that's how tight the demand is right now. And so how do we work through our new Office of Early Childhood and the funding that we have and the partnerships with workforce development or vocational education to rethink how the industry can adapt as well? The truth, again, going back to the point that we need to be shovel ready. Every time I talk to our federal delegation, they tell me on climate and on childcare, these are pretty bipartisan initiatives that we are going to see some progress on with funding. But the truth is that if tomorrow, all of a sudden, the federal government passed a major package with the billions of childcare funding that we need, and we plugged it directly into what exists in Boston today, we would be exacerbating inequities, because the geographic locations where childcare exists in our city and the hours, actually we've been losing seats in the neighborhoods with the greatest number of kids under age 5, and often those are in communities of color and in households where families are essential workers as well. And so we need to do our part to make sure that we're ready for that federal funding to come down to support that. It feeds right back into getting people into a groove of how you can balance having a family, working in the city, living in the city, affording to be here, housing and transportation and childcare. These infrastructure pieces are absolutely critical to unlocking the potential of all of our placemaking and downtown activity that we're trying to create as well.
Thank you, Mayor, for taking the time to talk us through that. That was really helpful. I hear that you are off to another event, and so I appreciate you staying long enough to take some questions.
I will bring greetings from you all. I'm off to congratulate all of our graduating Boston Public Schools valedictorians at their official lunch, so very excited. And thank you for having me.
So thanks, everyone, for coming. I wanted to thank the mayor for her remarkable comments, very inspiring. My name is Don Baldini, and for my day job, I am a vice president, we have more than a few, and senior state affairs officer with Liberty Mutual Insurance Company, a global property and casualty insurer which is called Boston home since its founding in 1912. I am also fortunate enough to be the current chair of the Research Bureau, and although I grew up and was born and raised in the greater Boston area, for the past 5 years I've had the privilege of being an official resident of South Boston. And it really is amazing to see the resurgence that our city has undergone and continues. And with the leadership of Mayor Wu, I think we're all confident for a very bright future. But again, I'm going to cut my prepared remarks short because I really do want to introduce, for our concluding address, M. Lee Pelton, President and CEO of the Boston Foundation, another key Boston entity that has helped guide us in the past and will no doubt play a critical role as we face our collective challenges together. Lee will discuss the Boston Foundation's new strategic plan that places equity at the heart of the Foundation's work and affirms the power of civic leadership to advance equity in Greater Boston. So it's now my pleasure to turn the mic over to Lee Pelton.
Well, Don, thank you and for that introduction, and Pam, thank you for the extraordinary leadership that you've provided at the Bureau. You know, it's not lost on me that actually these speeches should have been reversed. That is to say, I should have been the warm-up act to the major attraction. But if Mayor Wu was here, I would thank her for warming you up for me. So. You know, a year ago today, I concluded my career in higher education, which encompassed 2 university presidencies spanning almost a quarter of a century and 2 deanships more than a decade. Today, and as I often jokingly say, this marks the first time in my professional life, really, that my emails don't end in .edu. You know, the definition of a university or college president is someone who lives in a big house and begs for money. Well, it's nice at long last to have the tables turned. However, you cannot imagine how many people now want to have lunch with me. And since I became president and CEO of the Boston Foundation, I've been meeting with people throughout our city and region, working closely with community, business, and nonprofit leaders, our own board and our staff, to create a bold new strategic vision for the Boston Foundation. And I say this with the recognition that 2 years ago, on Memorial Day, George Floyd was murdered by a Minneapolis police officer, which in turn led to a national racial reckoning whose impact, though predictably muted, still resonates today. Out of those conversations that I've had, internal and external, we've developed a new strategic vision and plan that we are calling our new pathway. It has 5 core strategies: amplify the impact of the Boston Foundation's civic leadership to create opportunity and equity; repair the harm caused by systemic and structural economic, social, gender, and racial disparities across all dimensions in our society; 3, to build and nourish ideas and programs that contribute to an equitable and just society for marginalized communities. 4, commit to closing racial wealth gaps, which you heard Mayor Wu talk about this morning. Inspire and collaborate with our donors and partners to mobilize impactful philanthropy aligned with the Foundation's strategic vision and core strategies. But among the 5, our commitment to closing racial wealth gaps stands out, given the times in which we find ourselves, even though we recognize it is the most challenging. We approach this work with deep humility, with hope, and with the promise to undertake an honest appraisal of our own practices first. And we approach this work with the knowledge that new structures, programs, and policies are built in league with community, not just for the community. A year prior to my appointment at TBF, all of us were experiencing a confluence of events, perhaps unique in American history. They made up what I have called a triple pandemic: COVID-19, the economic devastation it caused, and the very, very public exposure of the racial disparities that have long plagued our nation and our cities. And these events dramatically illustrated the inequities that America has been living with for far too long. Specifically for our city, they showed everyone who lives and works here that there are 2 Bostons, one prosperous and well off, and the other struggling to make ends meet in one of the cities, in one of the nation's most unequal cities. The triple pandemic also pulled back the curtain to reveal the devastating effects of systemic and structural racism, even as we acknowledge that it intersects with other class, economic, gender, ethnic, and forms of injustice, and that many people and groups suffer from these inequities. In doing so, it sparked something in all of us who care deeply about our nation and our communities, and it led to a groundswell of self-scrutiny and civic activism in Boston and across the country. Now, of course, only history will determine whether the energy behind that activism will ignite a movement for real and lasting change. And what I do know, and I hope that you know it as well, that is, it must simply be more than a moment in time. Instead, we are called to work together to seize this moment and to begin to write a new chapter for the city of Boston and its current and future residents. We know that everyone, regardless of age or race or gender or who they love, deserves a chance to benefit from the remarkable growth Greater Boston has experienced over the last several decades. And why should the Boston Foundation be connected with confronting these inequities in our city? Well, the answer lies in the role that it has played for more than 100 years. While TBF's history is authentically Bostonian, it's also deeply American, a proxy for the ideas and hopes about the unfolding future of an increasingly diverse United States, the common enterprise of many divergent peoples and perspectives acting together in shared interests. And everything the foundation has taken on, its primary concern has always been with those who are struggling the most in our city, those fighting for a better life. Civic leadership must be bold and it must be audacious. Nothing less will do. And it's that what brought me to the Boston Foundation. It sits at the center of our work. Today, our partners are everyone in our community, those who toil mostly unacknowledged to create a more equitable place for everyone who lives here. But if civic leadership sits at the center of our work, equity sits at the very heart of who we are and who we hope to be. Racial inequities are systemic. They are structural. They are commonplace. They are forged over decades, even centuries. And any attempt to dismantle or to disassemble them will require extraordinary patience, generosity, and time. Across most dimensions of our society, the equity landscape continues to be grim as aggregate income and wealth disparities continue to grow. So that the great American dream is beyond the reach of many Americans, not only for a single generation, but across multiple generations. As most of you know, a 2015 Boston Fed report, The Color of Wealth, said that the net worth of white Bostonians, this was in 2015, was $225,000, and the net worth of black Bostonians was $8. Today, those numbers are almost $250,000 for white Bostonians and the same $8 for black Bostonians. And nationwide, that gap is 10 to 1. And I'm here to tell you that something is deeply wrong in a city or a nation that would produce such startling wealth disparities. It did not happen by accident. It's not isolated to Boston. It happened because of legalized and other practices, some intended, others not, that have allowed the racial wealth gap to persist and continue to grow. Now, most, if not all of you, are aware of America's history of discriminatory housing and zoning planning practices, many of which were legal and sanctioned by governments, but all of which contributed to an enormous racial wealth gap that continues to grow. For instance, covenants that barred either specific races or everyone, and I'm quoting here, from a covenant other than of Caucasian race from owning, from occupying, from renting, from selling, or inheriting any building. Redlining that graded neighborhoods based on their potential mortgage lending risks were tied, as we know, explicitly to race. But what many of us don't know is that redlining still exists. You know, there was a 538 project that analyzed the demographics of 138 metropolitan areas whose maps showed that nearly all formerly redlined zones were still proportionately black, Latino, or Asian, while 2/3 of what we might call green line zones were still majority white. As one author notes, the legacy of redlining extends beyond housing segregation. Redline neighborhoods have worse access to health care, they have poor educational opportunities, and an increased risk of climate change, since many of those areas are prone to flooding or extreme heat or extreme changes in climate. Eliminating the wealth gap involves understanding and unwinding policies and systems that have for too long excluded or made it more difficult for non-white people to accumulate the equity to pay for education, to buy homes, or start businesses. So let's take home ownership. The historical barriers that made home ownership nearly impossible for people of color in Boston and beyond have left a very difficult legacy. Today, blacks are about half as likely as whites to own homes in greater Boston, losing a critical opportunity to build wealth and security through home equity. Even beyond the ample evidence that racism plays a role in decisions about home financing, non-white home buyers lacking savings face steeper odds for loan approval and worse interest rates than whites. And research shows that those with homes trying to sell or upgrade face lower home appraisals than whites, even when controlled for the neighborhood or the location. Inequities in home ownership also affect non-white small business owners. In a Boston Indicators report, which comes out of the Boston Foundation, The Color of Wealth Capital, the authors traced a direct connection between historical challenges that have kept people of color from home ownership and the challenges facing businesses of color. Unable to tap home equity as collateral, entrepreneurs of color receive less favorable loan terms. With poor loan terms, they face greater pressure to manage their debts than their white peers. With fewer historical banking relationships, since banks operate in greater concentration in communities with more robust equity systems, they have fewer options to find competitive financing. Add that to the evidence of real racial differences in the treatment of white and non-white borrowers, and you can see that the wealth gap feeds upon itself. As was once famously said in a congressional hearing, come on now, we're better than this. But here's the thing, erasing the gap is worth it for all of us. By one estimate, eliminating the racial wealth gap has cost the American economy $16 trillion over the last 20 years. And closer to home, the Massachusetts Taxpayers Foundation estimated that closing racial wealth gaps in Massachusetts could raise the Commonwealth's GDP by $25 billion over the next 5 years. So in short, it's an investment worth making. Closing the gap means more money in the system for everyone, regardless of race or ethnicity. Closing the racial wealth gap is not a zero-sum game. But first, we need to acknowledge and then seek to eliminate the structural and underlying causes of the disparities that marginalized people have to deal with in our community. We need to work together to repair the threadbare social fabric that we function within now. Repair calls on us to see the harm that has been done, to try to understand it and find a way to redress it from a shared space. But we all know that repairing the damage is not enough. We must use our resources to build, to encourage new ideas, create and support promising enterprises that contribute to the common good in any way that we can. I think that the great advantage that we have now is that we are launching this ambitious agenda in Boston that has run out of patience with out-of-touch leaders, a Boston that is demanding change and embracing agents of change and courage, such as we heard this morning from Mayor Michelle Wu and many more. And as I like to say, it's often more effective to change the balance of power than it is to try to change the minds of those who are in power. Our common goal should be nothing less than working together to build Winthrop's true city on a hill that we long for and that everyone who lives here deserves. Our agenda is a bold agenda, but it will provide increased clarity and focus on the issues that we face and the efforts of the Boston Foundation to respond to them. And as we join together in this work, we will be buoyed once again by the exhortation for Boston to be a beacon of hope and inspiration for others to follow. However, there is no single entity, no single sector, whether it be business or nonprofits, philanthropy, funders, and donors, municipal or state governments that can do this alone. What is needed most now is a coalition of multiracial and multi-sectional people and programs of goodwill and good conscience to commit to closing the racial wealth gaps, even though we know that success will be a long and dusty road. The Boston Foundation will lead the way, for we are eager to join forces with any or all of you to build a new era of creativity, prosperity, and solidarity in our city. And all of us here this morning can fulfill our purpose and accept the call to greatness when we face the responsibility and what it means with purpose and with persistence. Together, where we see a hurt, we will seek to soothe it. Where we see a wrong, we will seek to right it. And where we see a broken heart, we will seek to mend it. In 1916, John Dewey described democracy as the most ethical aspiration conceived by ethical communities. This aspiration was unattainable, he wrote, without a society's commitment to lifelong education, to develop the capacities for associated living in a society characterized by complexity and diversity. And as a nation committed to equity, and I hope to social justice, our hope is that out of the rich diversity of human experience, we can create communities made both beautiful and effective by their pluralism. Communities that will turn the tide of human want into a sea of joy and light. We must find what binds us all together in common hope and need, not what divides us. For we may or may not all come to love one another, but to be part of the best of this place, we must have the moral courage to listen and learn from each other. This is the great American dream, not the kind of dream that is available only to those privileged by history or family income, not the kind of dream that is built on narrow self-interest, but rather a compelling vision of what we could be if we were truly open to the best that is known and thought in the world. So I challenge you, I challenge all of you to lift up your sweet and strong voices wherever you work, wherever you play, wherever you live. Lift up your hand of compassion, lift up your hand of hope, your hand of faith. And our great promise is that we will meet our challenges head on with honesty and integrity and a commitment to doing what is right. So as Dr. King reminded us, we will come together again. We will work together again. We will pray together again. We will hope together again. We will reach the other side together. And we will stand united as one nation with the hope that our nation's motto, e pluribus unum, the one out of the many, may become a living creed. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Lee, I think I can say on behalf of the Research Bureau that we look forward to collaborating with you on the mission you're embarking on. I think that's true of many other individuals, companies, and entities that are in the room. I want to thank the mayor again for making time to come with us, come here with us and speak about her vision for the future of the city. I want to wish everybody a good, happy, safe summer, and I hope you join us again in the fall when we gather for the Shattuck Awards, which is one of the highlights of the Research Bureau's annual agenda, and I think something that everyone really enjoys. So we look forward to seeing you in the fall for the Shattuck Awards. Thank you again for coming, and have a great summer.
Everybody's looking for something on the city streets. Everybody just keeps on walking on the city streets. Everybody's looking for loving on the city streets. Everybody just keeps on walking on the city streets.